Welcome, and thank you for joining today's Western EIM Governing Body meeting. Before we begin, please ensure you've opened the WebEx participant and chat panels by using the associated icons located at the bottom of your screen. Please note that all audio connections are muted at this time. If you require technical assistance, please send a chat to the host. With that, I'll turn the conference over to Roger Calanton. Please go ahead.
Thank you, and welcome everybody to the EIM Governing Body General Session meeting. Let me start us out before I turn it over to Chair Prescott for the agenda with a roll call. And Chair Prescott?
I'm here.
Vice Chair Decker?
Here.
Member Fong?
Here.
Member Linville?
Here.
And Member Konziolka?
Here.
Thank you. Over to you, Chair Prescott.
Okay. Thank you, Roger, and welcome everyone to the Western EIM Governing Body meeting, general session. First on the agenda is time for public comment, and this would be for comment other than the decisional item. We'll have public comment on that particular item after the presentations are made. So, operator, you want to check and see if anybody has a general public comment?
Yeah, if you do have a public comment, you may enter the comment queue by pressing #2 on your telephone keypad. You'll hear a notification when your line is unmuted. At that time, please then state your name, affiliation, and comment. Once again, if you do have a comment, please press #2 on your telephone keypad to enter the comment queue. All right, looks like we have no comments at this time.
Okay, thank you, Roy. Appreciate that. So, moving on to agenda item number 2, it's the decision on market enhancements for summer 2021 readiness, the load, export, and wheeling priorities. And I think, let's see, Roger, did you have something to say before we start?
I did. I wanted to, for the record, note that we have received 3 public comment letters on this item. They have been provided to the governing body. The first one is a joint letter from Arizona Public Service, NV Energy, Salt River Project, and Tucson Electric Power. The second one from Bonneville Power Association, and the third public comment letter provided to the governing body was from PowerX.
Okay, thank you. And with that, it's the Bonneville Power Administration. I guess it's the same sort of thing. But I understand.
I'm sorry. That's what I get when I abbreviate on my notes. Sorry about that.
Yeah, thanks. No worries. Okay, so I think to kick off this topic, I think we're going to actually have Mark Rothleader. Is that correct?
Yes. And good afternoon, governing body members. Today, Greg Cook, our Executive Director of Market and Infrastructure Policy, is here today to seek your advisory opinion on the last market enhancement element we consider necessary for this summer's readiness efforts. The proposed changes today address observations from last summer in which, at times, exports clearing the day-ahead market received priority in real time, even when they were not supported by separate capacity than was needed to serve ISO load. While we made some important practice modifications to the residual unit commitment process last September to identify when such exports can and cannot be supported, the additional enhancements we propose today further clarify the priority and associated criteria when exports and wheels should receive such priority relative to the ISO load. While the concerns with the export provisions have largely been addressed in this proposal, the wheel-through provisions of this proposal are more challenging and remain contentious as it opens up foundational concepts of open access, native load protections, and resource adequacy that are most relevant during times of scarce supply and transmission. In the case of the wheeling proposal today, we've tried very hard to develop a solution for this summer that was grounded in principles of fairness, equity, and also recognize that the arrangements were made prior to knowing how these changes were going to come out. As a result, we are committed to continue to develop a more durable solution beyond this summer. I want to express my appreciation to all stakeholders, as well as the Department of Market Monitoring and the MSC, as well as our staff, for their intense engagement on this issue. While stakeholders continue to have concerns and polarized perspectives about certain elements of the proposal, it is essential to get this proposal in front of FERC to provide clarity of the rules for this summer, as well as getting guidance for the longer term. With that, I will turn it over to Greg Cook.
Thanks, Mark, and good afternoon, Chair Prescott and governing body members. I'm here to present our proposal for market enhancements for the summer 2021 readiness related to export load and wheeling priorities. This proposal falls under your advisory authority as it applies generally to the day-ahead as well as the real-time market. And, I think as Mark said, these proposed enhancements are really designed to try and fairly balance the need to reliably serve the ISO's load and provide open access service to the ISO transmission system with limited changes that we could implement for this summer. So next slide, please, Christina. So again, in response to the issues that were identified from last summer's heat wave events, we're proposing 3 sets of changes to the market scheduling priorities for exports and wheel-through self-schedules relative to the ISO load. Again, these are all changes that we believe can be implemented this summer. So first, we're proposing to change how exports are cleared in the day-ahead residual unit commitment process and prioritized relative to ISO load through the real-time market. Next, enhancements for requirements for designating a non-resource adequacy capacity to back the high-priority export schedules. And then finally, changes to how the market prioritizes wheel-through self-schedules. Next slide, please. So the first set of changes we are proposing are to no longer prioritize exports clearing the day-ahead market over serving ISO load. So today, all exports that clear the day-ahead market are prioritized over serving ISO load in real time. And this can be somewhat problematic because the residual unit commitment process does not ensure that the resource adequacy capacity that could be needed to serve ISO load in real time could potentially be supporting exports that cleared the day-ahead market process. So to address this issue, we are proposing to really shore up the rules that we have around the 2 classes of export schedules. And while we have 2 classes today, these changes will shore up the rules and enforce that these 2 classes prioritizations through the real-time market. And so the 2 classes we have today are essentially exports not backed by non-resource adequacy capacity. So those, when we get into the real-time market, would have a lower scheduling priority than ISO load. But exports that are backed by non-resource adequacy resources will be deemed high-priority exports and provided the same scheduling priority as ISO load through the real-time market. And we're also proposing that the non-RA resource that is backing that high-priority export will also have to rebid into the real-time market in the event that it was not scheduled in the day-ahead market in order to maintain that scheduling priority all the way through real-time. Next slide, please. So we're also proposing enhancements to the rules for specifying a non-resource adequacy resource to back a high-priority export to better ensure that the capacity backing that export is not capacity that has been sold to an ISO load-serving entity. So first, we're requiring that resources must be identified in advance that they are eligible to back those high-priority exports, and we would record this in our market systems. Next, we're also requiring that resources that are identified as supporting a high-priority exports must confirm that a load-serving entity outside of the ISO has a right to that capacity and that it has not been sold to an ISO load-serving entity. In addition, the designated resource, we will notify the designated resource that it has been designated to support a high-priority export, and this is to ensure that it knows that obligation and can meet those obligations. And then finally, Related to variable energy resources, the proposal allows for variable energy resources to be designated to back high priority exports. However, the export quantity must be no greater than the lowest 15-minute forecast output for the hour, and this is to provide greater assurance that the resource can support the export over the entire hour. Next slide, please. Our proposal also includes clarifications for how resource D rates are treated for resources that have only sold part of their output as resource adequacy capacity. These are also known as partial resource adequacy resources. So today we default to taking the outage from the non-RA portion first, but we're proposing to change this to first, if a scheduling coordinator notifies the ISO of a contract term that specifies how they want those outages applied to both the resource adequacy and the non-resource adequacy portion of the capacity, we'll apply those terms. Otherwise, if the scheduling coordinator does not specify how those outages should be applied, we will change the default to be that the ISO will apply a pro rata distribution of that outage against the resource adequacy and non-resource adequacy portions of the capacity. Next slide, please. So then the last set of enhancements address wheel-through self-schedules. Currently, all wheel-through self-schedules cleared in the residual unit commitment process have a higher scheduling priority than imports or internal generation that's needed to serve the ISO load. And again, when we're talking about wheel-throughs, we're talking about these are schedules that consist of a balanced import and export schedule. This is generally wheel-throughs are not a problem, but it could be problematic because these wheel-throughs can use transmission capacity that is needed by resource adequacy supply to serve ISO load. So to address this, we're proposing to create a separate category of high-priority wheel-through self-schedules that are needed to serve resource adequacy needs in external balancing authority areas. And so we propose to change the priorities so that high-priority wheel-through self-schedules would now have the same priority as serving ISO load with self-scheduled supply. Next slide, please. So our proposal includes new requirements for establishing a high-priority wheel-through self-schedules. Now, the intent of the proposal is to provide high-priority status to wheels that are used by external load-serving entities that are counting on them to meet their reliability needs. So we're proposing some new requirements to establish that high priority. First, in order for wheels, we're requiring that wheels be planned in advance so that they need to notify the ISO 45 days prior to the month the megawatt quantity of the wheel. This is aligned with the ISO load-serving entities that are required to make their resource adequacy showings for the month 45 days prior to the month. And we're also putting in a requirement that they must attest that they've secured firm transmission to the ISO border for the month for the hours of their contract to serve load. Now, the reason we put this requirement in place was to provide assurances that the external load-serving entity has planned on using the wheel-through self-schedule, again, to meet its resource adequacy requirements. Next slide, please. And then finally, we're also proposing a new process to equitably allocate transmission in the event that the hourhead scheduling process is infeasible. So although the market will provide equal priority to high priority wheels and ISO load, the market optimization does not ensure that we would have a pro rata adjustment would occur, and this is due to several factors such as it includes losses in its optimization. Therefore, we're proposing an administrative pro rata adjustment process that we would trigger in the event that the hourhead scheduling process could either not meet the demand or if it had to reduce a high priority wheel schedule. And so the pro rata adjustment would be based on the amount of resource adequacy as well as high priority wheels. We would do an adjustment based on those two quantities. However, the wheel quantity would be limited by their day ahead schedule. And the reason for this requirement is to better ensure reliability so that we have advance notice of those high priority wheels coming into the market, and also provide incentive to submit those wheel through self schedules through the day ahead market. And then finally, this pro rata allocation would apply to both binding intertie constraints as well as internal constraints on Path 26. However, it should be noted that ultimately those schedule adjustments would ultimately be determined by the ISO operators. The operators will look at the adjustments that come through that pro rata process, but the operators will then take into account any changing conditions or actions they could potentially take to either increase or restore those curtailed wheel-through schedules. And then finally, this part of the proposal, the wheeling through part of the proposal, is going to be an interim approach that we're proposing would sunset on May 31st of next year. And again, this will provide us some additional time to develop more comprehensive changes to how we would allocate out this high priority scheduling access. Next slide, please. So stakeholders, there's a lot of concerns that have been raised about these proposed changes. I'll go through these topic by topic. First, on the Ruck, the changes to the Ruck export priority rules. We did have a concern that one market participant had concerns that the day-ahead market results should carry through with that high priority into the real-time market. However, we believe that, as I stated, that Ruck is unable to ensure that that supply is not being used to support an export, that it's RA supply that could be used to meet that export in the real-time market, which is inconsistent with how we view RA, having a real-time must-offer obligation as well. The other comment I would make on this is when those schedules do clear that residual unit commitment process in the day-ahead market, there is a very high assurance that those schedules that did clear that residual unit commitment process will not be cut in real time, because the Ruck process does ensure that we have sufficient physical resources to meet those schedules. The next topic is the new attestation rules for high priority exports. The concern that was raised here was that the ISO does not have sufficient validation measures in place to ensure that those resources can support a high priority export. And we agree that there could be more done in the area of validation, but in order for what we can implement by this summer, we think the attestation rules are a good measure, a good interim measure or a good initial measure, I should say, to ensure that those resources are available. And we'll continue to work on a longer-term solution that would include some enhanced validation rules to address some of these concerns. And then finally, next slide, please. On the outage distribution between RA capacity and high priority export capacity, again, this is an issue that was not addressed in the final proposal, but we did receive some comments on this, and we agreed that reducing those high priority export capacity before the RA capacity when the units are derated was not an equitable solution. So we have changed that to either use what the scheduling coordinator indicates the contractual terms are, or use a pro rata distribution of the outage over the RA and non-RA portion. And then finally, on the wheel-through priority issues, there's really two camps on this issue. The parties external to the ISO balancing authority area believe that the proposal goes too far and restricts open access, whereas on the other side, the internal load-serving entities feel that this proposal does not go far enough to protect ISO load. Our response to that is, again, we strove to provide a balanced approach that would address emergency conditions that could occur this summer. And again, we'll stress that this is an interim approach that we'll be working to replace with a more comprehensive solution that would allow for forward procurement of that wheeling capability. Next slide, please. So in closing, we're requesting that the EIM governing body support the proposed export load and wheeling priority changes. Again, we believe these changes provide a balanced approach for what can be implemented this summer to fairly allocate the limited supply during emergency events when the ISO market cannot meet both the ISO load and scheduled exports. And we also believe that These changes fairly allocate the transmission capacity where there is insufficient transmission to accommodate both the wheel-through schedules and imports or other energy flows. So that's the end of my presentation. I'll be happy to address any questions.
Well, thank you very much, Greg. So now I'd open it up to any of the governing body members that have questions for Greg or Mark or staff. Okay, Rob.
John, did you want me or Anita to go first?
Well, go ahead, Rob. Then Anita, you're up next.
Okay. Greg, good afternoon. Just so you know, I actually had a number of questions, but Mark addressed them in his opening remarks, so I don't need to re-ask those. So I do have one, though, for you. And you addressed in the presentation the issue under stress conditions. Could you address for us just a little bit on any potential impacts that would be expected during non-stress conditions?
Yeah, this proposal really doesn't come into play under non-stress conditions. This proposal only comes into play when we have, when we're unable to resolve market constraints through economic bids. And again, through normal market conditions, we're able to do that the vast majority of the time. In fact, this really hasn't been much of an issue until, last summer when we saw, some of in the summer heat wave events. But again, what we're really trying to do here is, I think primarily, is really clarify when we do get into these very extreme conditions, when we either don't have enough supply to meet load or have to potentially curtail a wheel-through schedule, clarifying what the rules are going to be so that market participants know in advance what they can count on, what they cannot count on going into this summer.
Thank you, Greg. That's all I have.
Nita?
So Greg, you actually hit on kind of the side of the question I was going to ask. So I'm looking at the attachment to the Board of Governors information. It's the attachment to the memorandum from Anna McKenna. And on page 7 of it, there's a category that says concerns about the high volume of priority wheels this summer. And over in the management response, it says last summer wheel-throughs were small in magnitude and irrelevant to what caused the ISO to shed load. So I'm a little confused that we're doing all these things if in fact the wheel-throughs were irrelevant.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of issues that we're trying to get ahead of prior to this summer. One is it's true that the wheels were irrelevant last summer, but we are seeing fairly significant in the forward energy price indices, fairly significant price differentials between the Northwest and the Southwest, which could mean there could be significantly more wheel-through schedules coming through California this summer. And then secondly, we've also, through this proposal, tightened up those high priority export rules where, again, we could see where some of those entities were relying on those exports last summer could be relying on wheel-through schedules this summer. So, we do have that concern that we could be seeing significantly more wheel-throughs this summer, and in the event that we do, we wanted to make sure we had, the market rules in place so that we'd be able to handle that.
So, that almost makes it sound like we're fixing a problem that's not a problem, but I'm done. That was my question.
Okay. Carl or Val, anything before we move on? Okay, very good. Thank you, Greg. We really appreciate that. So next up we have the DMM comments from Eric Hildebrand.
Roy, can you open up Eric's line, please?
Yes. Hello, can everybody hear me?
Yes, thanks, Eric. Go ahead.
Okay, thanks. Good afternoon. Okay, I appreciate the opportunity to comment on this issue today. We recognize it's very controversial, but it's very important to address this before next summer, just in case the ISO and the rest of the West finds itself in a similar situation to last summer. We think the ISO's proposal effectively addresses one of DMM's key recommendations that came out of the load shedding events last summer. And specifically, we recommended that the ISO first clarify its rules regarding the curtailing of exports versus balancing area load, and that it also work with stakeholders and perhaps other balancing areas to modify the ISO's rules and modify those as needed to make these rules more similar to those in other balancing areas. We think the ISO's proposal does both these things and addresses a number of other issues that came up in the stakeholder process, such as the treatment of wheel-through schedules. We've provided detailed comments throughout the stakeholder process on this that outlines our thinking, but I guess just in a comment here is that while many parties are not satisfied with the proposal, I think really everyone is better off due to the increased clarity that's been provided, as well as the steps that the ISO has taken to accommodate any contracts that may have been signed by load-serving entities outside the ISO for this summer. In terms of the specific changes made, they do make the ISO rules much more comparable in our mind to those rules in other balancing areas. However, they still are, even the interim rules, our understanding is they will be still be more favorable to wheel-throughs than the rules in other balancing areas. And I say that because the rules will grant equal priority to many wheel-through schedules, even though these schedules do not have long-term rights through the California ISO system, and there may not be any extra transmission beyond what's needed to serve the ISO balancing area load. So as Greg noted, I believe the ISO has been noted in the stakeholder process to examine how the ISO might establish a process to make long-term transmission rights available, but in the interim, that process does not exist. So finally, I think on the issue of open access, I know parties which support and oppose the proposal both contend that their position is most consistent with the principles of open access. But based on our review and I think some of the citations provided by various parties in their comments, I think it's clear that at least in FERC's, the intent of open access was that it would only apply to transmission capacity which is available above and beyond what might be needed to serve the native area load of all the different balancing areas. So I think from that perspective, the proposal by the ISO is very consistent and most consistent with the principles of open access. But finally, I guess, that it does get the issue in front of FERC, and ultimately, again, it's better to get certainty on these issues for all parties before next summer. So with that, we're supporting the proposal and look forward to answering any questions you may have.
Okay, thank you, Eric. I do have one question before I open it up to the other governing body members, and that is, we did today receive 3 letters, public comment letters that Roger explained earlier. Have you had a chance to look at those letters?
I did look at them briefly, yes.
No change then based on that information?
Yeah, no, I think we understand, we understand the entity's positions or, in terms of, the proposal definitely is less favorable than the existing rules to wheel-through schedules. But again, I think it remains to be more favorable than comparable rules in other areas. To the extent that the rules can be made comparable, we're comparing a market-based system in the California ISO with oath-based systems. So you're never going to make them all completely comparable. But I guess I would get back to, the principles of open access. And it does seem that, the framework the other parties are coming from is one in which, there is additional transmission available above and beyond what's needed to serve balancing area load, which can and could be made available through the long-term transmission rights, firm rights, but that does not exist within the California ISO. And so we think the current, in fact, the rules make ISO rules more consistent with other balancing areas and the principles of open access.
Okay, thank you, Eric. I appreciate that. Other governing body member comments or questions for Dr. Hildebrand? Okay, very good. Thanks, Eric, for that report. Okay, next up we have the MSC comment from Dr. Bushnell. Can we unmute his line?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Good afternoon. This, as usual, turned out to be a longer opinion than we'd hoped when we started, and it has been a bit of a moving target. I'm going to focus my comments on the wheeling topic, which is, I believe, the most contentious remaining. We do talk about exports in the opinion, and I do think there's still some work that can be done on exports, but let me focus on the wheeling. At a very high level, I think that the fundamental issue here is that there are more claims for, let's call it quasi-firm access or claims for access to the transmission capacity in the CAISO system than there may be transmission capacity. I think there was good questions earlier about exactly whether this is a problem or not. I'll try to circle back to that. But there's certainly people worried about that there will be a shortage. And if that does in fact materialize, then we have to do something to try to basically ration the access. And there is a proposal here to do pro rata rationing. If we don't have prices that can clear this excess demand, we are going to have to do some kind of rationing. And the concern here is if we don't come up with some kind of way to limit requests for access, then when we get to a pro rata rationing process, we want to deter the incentive to just inflate requests in order to get a bigger chunk of this pro rata reduction. And that's really the spirit of the proposal, is to try to come up with some kind of qualifying criterion for qualifying for this pro rata rationing step, if in fact it is needed. And this applies to both CAISO load as well as wheels, where it's limited to some form of representation of how you're relying on the transmission for a reliability need. Now, there's certainly a lot of disagreement over exactly how those criteria meet those standards, but that is the spirit of this, to try to just keep the amount of wheels being requested from just kind of being inflated when we head into some kind of need for pro rata rationing. Before I get into the specifics of that, I want to just sort of make note that we weren't supposed to be in a situation like this because the whole idea behind ISO pricing was that the prices clear the demand for the transmission so that it is no greater than the amount of transmission available. That's the whole idea behind financial transmission access in real time, as opposed to the standard model of trying to get firm access and having a property right that needs to be traded in kind of a complex way. The problem we have here is that the prices apparently won't be able to rise high enough to clear the excess demand, or at least that's what a lot of people are worried about. It certainly is what happened at times last summer. As the price can go higher, the congestion prices go higher as well, and that clears the demand and to be equal to the supply. And I think it was the last time I spoke to this body, we were talking about how the price at Palo Verde reached above levels that the CAISO price could reach at the time because of the limits on CAISO scarcity pricing. Those have been adjusted, but there is a real concern that because prices can go higher in places like the Desert Southwest than they can in the CAISO, that the demand to wheel through the system could create an arbitrage opportunity where the benefits of buying low and selling high exceed the cost of the congestion just because of the way we cap the congestion prices. So that's where maybe this is all unnecessary concern, but it's a real enough concern that I think having some safeguards in place are really prudent at this point. And as Eric said, getting some FERC clarification on some of this would also be beneficial. But I do hope that maybe this is something we don't need to worry about. I don't necessarily see a lot of damage other than maybe the precedence that pursuing this might have if we, in fact, don't have to go to the pro rata rationing. So let me just say a couple things about, and the other point about prices are the idea behind transmission rights in an ISO system is that they are financial, that you don't have a physical transmission right, because those have proved to be so inefficient on an hour-by-hour basis. And so the idea for long-term transmission access that was supposed to be was that the price of congestion would get pretty high, that would clear the demand for the transmission, and the people who had these financial transmission rights would be the ones who would use it, or they'd choose to just give up the transmission, but they would have the financial protection to be able to cover the congestion costs. And so that's the form of long-term transmission rights. The CAISOs had those in place for a long time, and there is a process for external loads to access those long-term or those transmission rights through an allocation process that involves steps that are really more complicated than what is being required of PT wheels. So when I talk, we've heard the specific aspects of this proposal. Basically, the idea behind the steps of PT wheel qualification, the standards have changed a couple times, but again, it's trying to sort out people who really are relying on the wheeling transactions for a reliability, long-term planning need, as opposed to entities that might want to take advantage of more short-term price differential arbitrage opportunities. And this was seemed to us a reasonable way of trying to do that, although we certainly recognize there's reasonable ways to disagree on that. But we do think there needs to be some step to limit this. And in fact, it's quite possible that the amount of wheels, even qualifying for PT wheels, combined with the amount of RA imports, is going to exceed the amount of CAISO transfer capability, and we will have to pro rata ration, meaning load may have to be cut to accommodate some PT wheels at some point. We really don't know what the numbers of the PT wheel amounts might look like. I'll just end with the comments that have been made, and we've heard these during our process as well. There's been some links about how RA contracts do not have to meet the same criterion as contracts that qualify for PT wheels. There are differences there. I think the CAISO has actually gone a fair way trying to align those, but there are certainly important differences. I think the issue there is whether there's a link between, as Eric said, whether native load has a right to reserve some transmission capacity in its system to serve its native load, whether there's a link between that right and how they use that transmission itself. In other words, do you have to sign a specific type of resource adequacy contract or other type of contract in order, as native load, to be able to reserve that transmission capacity? I'm not a FERC law expert, and I will say that that's not a very efficient way to run a transmission system, to have to sort of link the reservation to specific sources or specific uses. I do think those are somewhat distinct issues. And if, in fact, the interpretation that DMM has expressed that there is a precedent that areas do have some right to reserve some transmission capacity for their own native load needs, then those usually ideally wouldn't be linked to the specific contractual terms that they apply to use that transmission. I will say that my reading of this is the same as Eric's, that it does seem like there's a lot of precedence, and really talking to other VAs, that they agree that there is a right to reserve capacity to serve native load. I think, to be fair, the issue has been, what is the process for doing that? And is the CAISO will be upfront in saying they haven't had a process that other external VAs have gone through in terms of identifying available transmission capacity in a traditional way. in part because we thought prices would solve this problem for us, but prices aren't allowed to go high enough. And so that's behind the CAISO's statements about how they want to have a long-run solution here, and it would be involving some way of trying to identify in an acceptable way what that native load need might be, and hopefully preserving the beneficial aspects of ISO pricing in the process. But we do have to get through this summer, and that means trying to come up with some way of balancing these needs of the external wheels and native load with the capacity that we have. So I'll stop there. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you for that and for the opinion. So I'll open it up to the governing body for any questions for Dr. Bushnell. Carl?
Thank you very much for that presentation. It was very helpful. So I'm trying to understand what the fix looks like beyond this summer. I understand, I think that what you're saying is it's a combination of moving towards scarcity pricing and creating a capability to make financial or make transmission rights available to external entities. And I'm wondering, is that something that can be, whatever combination of those things or whatever else needs to be done, is that something that can happen fairly quickly, or is it going to take a while?
Well, we've discussed scarcity pricing in the past, and it's not an uncontroversial element as well. I do think we're moving towards that. I think there's still a real question as to whatever levels of scarcity pricing we might end up at, whether that's still sufficient to clear all demand for transmission. So I do think it's part of the solution. Whether it's the sole element remains to be seen. But I do envision us moving towards a circumstance where, yeah, we're relying on that congestion pricing combined with financial transmission rights, which are already available for external LSEs, to be a big part of the model. I think you might want to consider adding some tiebreaker rights to those FTRs, and that would be the controversial thing that we would really want to think through, because having a tiebreaker right associated with an FTR changes the incentives or the dynamics of what types of FBRs different loads might request in an allocation process and perhaps their trading. If it's a tiebreaker right that would happen, it basically would link to the priorities that we've been talking about here. I don't want to concretely sort of settle on that, but that seems to be the direction we would want to consider if we can work through what any potential unintended consequences of that kind of combined hybrid sort of financial right with some element of priority associated with it might be.
Okay, so just to make sure, I thought I heard, I think it was Greg said that there's an initiative coming to address the availability of transmission to external entities. Is that the prioritization criteria that you're just discussing that will be raised in that initiative, or is there something more to that?
Well, I would think that the initiative Greg was referring to is identifying how much transmission capacity of different types might be made available in different categories. So first identifying and defining and then identifying a quantity of what native load needs would be, for example. How tightly that is tied to the CRR allocation process, I think there's not anywhere close to full agreement on whether CRRs are the mechanism for then implementing those priorities, or whether there would be some other mechanism that might do that. So I think of it as there's first identifying the quantities, and then there's identifying the instruments in which you could take advantage of one priority or the other with.
Okay. Thank you. That's helpful. Thanks. That's all I have, John.
Okay. Thanks, Carl. Rob?
Dr. Bushnell, this is Rob, and thank you for your comments this afternoon and for the MSC for their opinion. I think that the write-up was very helpful. was very informative. I do have a question on the development of the MSC opinion, and that is when the MSC developed it, did the committee consider, evaluate, look at the transition aspect? In other words, what was the starting point and what was the ending point and the time frame at which this was occurring?
Are you referring to notions like sunset provisions and so forth, so the timing of the transition specifically?
No, thank you for that question back to me. No, I meant on the starting point being, currently we have a set of rules in place, and this will change that. And so did you look at where it was starting versus where it was ending? And then of course, we're talking about a change that is occurring from last summer to this summer, and now here it is April, and there isn't certainty, as Greg had mentioned, on the rules. And so, he placed a high priority on we need to move rapidly so that ultimately everybody has certainty. And so those are the two aspects I was asking if the MSC had incorporated into its opinion.
Yeah, I see. So there's a I might call it incumbency sort of element to this. Certainly we took that into consideration in the sense that when we get to the end of some kind of identifying of native load priorities process, it could very well be that the amount of transmission that would be made available for what might be the equivalent of firm wheeling would be less than what the PT wheel qualifying amount would be this year. And in fact, there were at several times it seemed attractive to try to just define a quantity to try to limit the amount of pro rata activity that we might need. But that's sort of where this starting point issue comes in the sense that to the extent there are transactions that have been going on really since last fall that maybe had some sense that there were changes coming, but not the exact nature of them. That's where the ideas behind having the PT wheeling criterion be what they are, and trying to somehow identify those transactions, as you say, that people had been putting in place as part of their resource plans during the whole period here, from other more opportunistic wheeling transactions that may arise. So to the extent we consider those elements, it's in recognizing the merits, or at least the spirit of the PT wheeling framework overall.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification. I appreciate that.
Okay, I do have one question, but Val or Anita, do you have anything for Dr. Bushnell?
Yeah, I just wanted, I don't quite know how to ask this question, but I'm kind of curious. We are, and thank you, John, we are, working intensely, as Mark Rossleder said early on, to resolve this, to get some clarity before June 1st. And I'm wondering, what if we push this off to July 1st? What kind of risks do we incur here?
Okay, so I think going back to the previous question, there are plans being made for later on in the fall that would greatly benefit from knowing one way or the other what the process will be for using the transmission in the CAISO system. So that would be one argument. The other would be that we don't quite know when a heat wave's going to arrive. Hopefully it won't be in June. Hopefully we're talking about hopefully we're talking about none at all. But if we do have a stressed condition, we don't know exactly when it might be in place. So I think those are the two arguments, and I'm not sure. Then they're also, I'm not sure what other issues can get really resolved through further delay. There were some, there's some better processes that would definitely, I think, lead us to a better outcome. But my sense is those are not 1-month processes, if that answers your question.
It does. Thank you.
Okay, just a quick thought here, and as I went through the paper and I've attended a lot of these meetings and read all the comments, and this is certainly a thorny topic, and I'm going to try a statement on you, Dr. Bushnell, and tell me if I'm kind of hitting the bigger picture in this statement. And it's kind of crude. It's coming from me, but you've done a lot of thinking on this, and see if we're close. So is this really the collision of two dissimilar paradigms for transmission allocation for native load service? And as you think about that, it's like I've been involved in reserving transmission for native load all my career, whether it's Idaho Power, Seattle City Light, or PNGC Power. So I understand the import of that. And it just seems to me that is the root of the problem here. There's two different paradigms. Is that even close to the...
Oh, yeah. Buried somewhere in our overly long opinion, I believe we say something along those lines. But yes, I think I view it as there's two components. So one is certainly this collision of the two paradigms, where on the one hand there's a reliance on reserving firm transmission capability through an identified available amount that can be marketed reliably. And on the other hand, there's sort of this notion of trying to allocate the transmission with high frequency in the most efficient way possible, but less focus on this idea of firm, non-firm, because the idea was if you were able to buy it in the market, it was firm, but we didn't really consider in that aspect the idea of not being able to clear the market. So yes, there is this collision of paradigms, and that's really part of it, but it's combined with the fact that the CAISO paradigm also is encountering this problem of having to break ties when the market doesn't clear. Under the traditional other outside CAISO paradigm, there is sort of a sequence that breaks ties where there's an identification through an open, transparent process of what needs are, and then the rest is marketed. And there isn't a need then to break the tie between the native load needs and the available transmission capacity that's made available. So that's a long-winded way of agreeing with you.
Okay, I appreciate that. It's always good when the MSC with the brain power could agree with me. So thanks for that. But and the reason I brought that up is it kind of ties with Carl and maybe a little bit what Rob was getting into. Is this is a bigger problem, and this is a problem that's going to take a longer period of time to really solve and get right. So I am concerned about that. But is there any other questions for Dr. Bushnell from the governing body? I guess we're good.
John?
Yeah.
John, this is Greg Cook. I could provide a little additional clarification. I believe it was Carl's questions on our longer term process for this. And I wanted to clarify, we had originally noted that we would be discussing some of these topics in our MIC, which is Maximum Import Capability Enhancements Initiative that's currently ongoing. But we received several comments that a lot of stakeholders would like to see this a separate initiative where we could comprehensively address these issues. So we will be doing that. And so our intentions are that we'll shortly be starting a new initiative on this, where I think Dr. Bushnell described it well, that we'd be looking at establishing identifying how much transmission is available, and establishing a forward process for giving entities the ability to procure those high priority scheduling rights as well. So, there's a lot of different aspects to such an initiative. I think it'll involve things like congestion revenue rights, as well as potentially impact, how we do our transmission planning and whether we need to start, considering wheel-through schedules in that as well. So we are considering a very comprehensive initiative to look at all aspects of this issue.
Okay, thanks, Greg. It's just too bad we can't get that done before summer, but I certainly understand why. So, did you have something, Dr. Bushnell, or?
I wanted to follow up on Greg's comment about starting an initiative, because it shows up in a lot of the documentation that the CalISO is going to start an initiative, or they're committed to start an initiative, or they want to start an initiative. Greg, can you give us any kind of signal about, like, when that might start? Just Because I think that's a really, really important, well, it needs to be done, and it's a really important statement for there to be some kind of a stake in the ground that commitment is, starting up in 30 days versus that commitment starting up in 6 months. So do you have any insight into that?
Yeah, internally we're starting that up, I would say immediately. We're working on, identifying the issues, putting together an issue paper. There's a lot of initial work that's going to be involved with that. We're also trying to obviously get this proposal completed and filed with FERC. But, I would anticipate we would be looking to publicly launch that stakeholder initiative sometime, late next month is our anticipation.
So May.
But again, we're right. Well, May, maybe early June. But again, that doesn't mean the initiative. We're not starting immediately on that initiative because we'll be doing a lot of internal work to be preparing that issue paper that would ultimately be issued to launch this initiative, either late May or early June.
No, that was really, really helpful, incredibly helpful. So thank you.
And sorry, can I jump in, John? So you will launch the effort in the May-June timeframe. We'll be in the middle of summer. We'll probably be experiencing and for the first time, application of the new rules that are temporary until May of next year. So you won't, whether or not you are able to accelerate this process, even during the summer, I assume you're going to have a very aggressive timeline to be able to make a FERC filing in time for the new durable rules to be in place by June 1 of next year. Is that correct? I mean, I think we need to warn everybody. This is going to be intense again.
Well, yeah, but again, Val, I think as we work through this, we will be working as expeditiously as possible. It's obviously unknown what the long-term solution is going to be at this point. And, once we know exactly what that is and the scope of it, we'll have a better idea of the actual implementation timing. Some pieces of the long-term solution may take longer to implement than others. I think we'll have to make an assessment as to where we are early next year as to what enhancements we might be able to get in place by next summer and what enhancements we might have to, get in place sometime after that. But, ultimately, our goal here is to come up with a comprehensive solution that works well for, allocating out, again, these high priority rights in a way that doesn't oversubscribe our transmission system.
But this current proposal in front of us today sunsets on May 31st of next year?
It does, just the wheeling aspect of it. But, again, our anticipation is that we are going to be working hard between now and then to try and come up with additional enhancements and be looking, so it's very likely that we could, file a portion of those enhancements to take place by summer of 2022. That would be an enhancement over what we would have in place for summer 2021. But I'm just trying to set expectations. It may not be the final solution because some of these, some aspects of the proposal, for example, may need to be coordinated with our CRR processes. As an example that, again, that's on different timelines, and we'll have to look at what all of those potential, timing conflicts and, what we're able to implement from a, a software standpoint is feasible as well.
Okay.
Okay, so I guess if there's nothing else for Dr. Bushnell, I guess we'll thank him and make sure you thank the other MSC committee members. And we will move on to the public comment section. And as everybody's getting queued up and the operator starts asking, make sure you clearly state your name and affiliation for the record when you start to ask or comment. So, operator?
All right, once again, if you would like to enter the comment queue, please press pound 2 on your telephone keypad. All right, looks like we do have a comment in the queue. Caller, please go ahead. Your line is unmuted.
Good afternoon. My name is Bobby Olson, and I am SRP's Director of Supply and Trading and Fuels, and I'm responsible for all of SRP's energy and commodity trading, as well as SRP's participation within EIM. And I'm here today on behalf of the Southwest load-serving entities, and that includes SRP, APS, Tucson Electric, and the Energy. Ask the EIM governing body to oppose the CAISO's proposed priority changes for exports, load, and wheel-through as presented herein. I'll start with the concept that we really recognize the difficulty of this issue, and we want to emphasize that none of us wish or desire for anyone to have unserved load this summer. Whether they consume electricity in California, Arizona, Nevada, or anywhere else across the West, we all have a common goal of trying to keep the lights on. We greatly appreciate the time and energy that the CAISO staff and leadership have provided working with our teams to try to resolve such a complicated set of issues. Like Vice Chair Decker indicated, we're not quite sure that the basis and requirements were there and identified. But unfortunately, as we've been working through this with CAISO staff, we really can't endorse the final proposal as it still falls short for several reasons. First, the proposal kind of fails to acknowledge or recognize forward contract deliverability to CAISO can be addressed by requiring firm transmission requirements for all energy delivered to the intertie. And while CAISO has noted and identified this as potentially a load service issue for CAISO, we believe that fundamentally it has to deal more with priority of energy secured outside of CAISO to be imported either into CAISO or wheeled through CAISO. And CAISO has established substantially more stringent requirements for wheel-through transactions, yet haven't applied the same criteria for import energy into CAISO. Doing so creates a fundamental disconnect with respect to treatment, not just for load within California, but really on the basis of that occurring outside of California. Second, by failing to recognize or accommodate priority for wheel-through transactions within the 45-day window, CAISO does substantially limit Southwest access to reliable energy, which is necessary to overcome generation outages and other unforeseen events that have historically been accommodated through market purchases. Third, this proposal disregards foundational open access principles by failing to respect the priority of transmission offered by neighboring VAs. CAISO's proposal here attempts to supersede the VA prioritization practices of their neighbors and substantially restricts access to its own transmission system. Now, that restriction of access isn't based on conditions within the transmission system. Their Path 26 reference, which does sit entirely within CAISO, it may be a reasonable adjustment. However, given that one of the constraints that they look at with respect to restriction of access is based on congestion occurring external to the California VA, we believe that that restriction is unique within the U.S., that establishing access to the CAISO transmission being fundamentally dependent upon congestion and events that occur outside of its system is entirely problematic. These restrictions only result because CAISO itself chooses not to acknowledge or require the deliverability of energy it depends on to meet its own load. The existing infrastructure is there, whether it's the e-tagging system or some other system. CAISO has the ability to identify the priority of energy that would be flowing into CAISO and have priority upstream. They choose not to. When we look at this, there are going to be many, many challenges, as there are every year, to reliably serving load this summer. But this proposal doesn't make it easier for entities across the West. It makes it substantially more difficult for entities across the West to meet that load. It increases the challenges for everyone but CAISO. And as a result, we strongly encourage the governing body to oppose the priority changes. Thank you.
Thank you, Bobby. Appreciate those comments. Next up.
All right, we'll go ahead and move on to our next caller. Please go ahead. Your line is unmuted.
Hello, this is Partha Malavadkar with PG&E. Chairman Prescott and CAISO EIM governing body members, thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. I first want to acknowledge the significant efforts of CAISO staff and management in advancing this topic as a part of the summer readiness issues in light of the events of last August. While we appreciate the complex nature of this solution, it should be clear from this proposal, as well as the discussion that you all have been having, that CAISO does not yet have a solution that allows for the CAISO BAA to reliably access the resource adequacy that LLCs have contracted for using internal transmission, which CAISO BAA customers have paid for on a long-term basis. We also recognize the need for CAISO to allow for open access and have a process for those external entities wanting to serve load using resources outside their area to receive service, and look forward to working with CAISO on a proactive basis to try to address these issues. As has been discussed already, FERC's open access rules have always protected the needs of a BAA's native load by allowing any BAA to set aside transmission needed to serve load. If longer-term high-priority service is requested, CAISO should have some sort of study process to identify what upgrades, if any, are needed to reliably accommodate the transaction. PG understands and recognizes that for the summer of 2021, the CAISO was unable to create a process analogous to those other ISO and RTOs and BAs, and must create an interim process to provide fair access to the transmission for incremental use. But to illustrate the problem, CAISO is proposing to pro rata allocate transmission rights on Path 26, which is an often binding constraint internal to the CAISO footprint that limits north to south flow between CAISO RA imports, PT wheels, and even internal RA generation that might be squeezed out during emergency conditions when all three can't be met. This issue surrounding other BAs in the Southwest's ability to obtain transmission service, to contract with resource adequacy, and for the ability for CAISO's BA to service load is really foundational to the rest of the EI market's functioning, including in particular the resource sufficiency test. While this is fundamentally a CAISO BA issue, we recommend the EIM governing body to advise CAISO management and the CAISO board to prioritize additional changes for 2022 to ensure that both CAISO BA load and outside load serving entities wanting to wheel through CAISO to serve load and be planned for on a longer term basis can both be met, or at minimum, both be prioritized over short-term transactions. So thank you again, and please let me know if you have any additional questions.
Well, thank you very much, Partha. Okay, next up in the queue.
Okay, moving on to our next caller. Please go ahead. Your line is unmuted. Caller, please make sure your device is not set to mute.
Sorry, it wasn't. It was, rather. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. This is Bonnie Blair. I represent the Six Cities group, which consists of the cities of Anaheim, Azusa, Banning, Colton, Pasadena, and Riverside, all publicly owned utilities in Southern California. I have to disagree with the contentions of external entities that the CAISO's proposal is somehow inconsistent with open access principles. There is a different paradigm in terms of transmission access in the CAISO, and the events of last summer brought to, I think, everyone's attention the need to address the question of long-term transmission reservations in the context of a market structure. But in the meantime, there is a need to address what has currently been a misalignment of priorities and a set of priorities that are absolutely inconsistent with open access principles. As prior to these revisions that CAISO management proposes, external entities have a super priority over CAISO load, and despite the fact that it's the load within the CAISO that bears nearly the full cost of the transmission system. Wheeling transactions pay the wheeling access charge on a volumetric basis when energy flows. So there's no long-term support for the cost of the transmission system, in contrast to the load within the CAISO, which supports any costs that remain after episodic use of the system by external entities. And the FERC's open access principles recognize first a priority for native load service, and the existing priorities are inconsistent with that. And second, they recognize that if there's a desire for long-term firm transmission service across the system, there's a charge that comes closer to the type of charge that native load customers pay for network service, and that is not something that is in place at this point. If anything, and I think both the Department of Market Monitoring and the Market Surveillance Committee have said this, under the proposed revisions, external entities will have better access, more favorable access to the CAISO transmission system than those external entities provide to others that want to use their systems. They will also have more favorable access than the FERC's open access principles require. So the playing field has been tilted much more favorably toward external entities in terms of access and priorities to the CAISO transmission system. The proposed revisions correct that to a degree. In other words, they do tilt the playing field a little bit more in favor, or a bit more in favor of CAISO transmission customers, but they don't create a level playing field, and they certainly don't violate open access principles. Thank you for the chance to speak. And the cities also recognize the need to address the issue of long-term access to the CAISO system and some process for reserving long-term service, and look forward to working with all stakeholders to come up with a process that's fair and creates a level playing field.
Thank you very much, Bonnie, for those comments. Next up in the queue.
All right, we'll go ahead and move on to our next caller. Please go ahead. Your line is unmuted.
Good afternoon. This is Eric Little for CalCCA. Thank you for the opportunity to speak this afternoon. Do appreciate it. Appreciate all the dialogue that's happened so far. I think what you're seeing here is the necessary evolution of systems. Today I drive a car that has more airbags in it than cylinders that my parents drove. But they didn't drive with a seatbelt either when they started off. And we discover along the way that there's better ways to do things, that there's different ways to do things, and we evolve as we go. I think you hit the nail on the head that these are very different systems. Systems whereby you go out and procure firm transmission rights, and a system which allocates transmission based upon willingness to pay are fundamentally different systems. But even behind that, the resource adequacy processes of these different entities is very, very different. The key then is to try to put these things together in terms where they will work together and not work against each other. And that's not an easy thing to do. And what you're hearing right now is there's entities that believe that this is working against them. in making the change. There's entities that believe that if you don't make the change, it's working against them, and that's a difficult spot to be in. I am reminded, though, that the last summer events, I believe California was the only one that had rotating outages. If I'm wrong on that, I will stand corrected. But nonetheless, California, as you know, looked at the way that they set up resource adequacy and the way that they're going to be able to get assets. And I will remind everybody that even though the ISO does not have a rule about having firm transmission upstream, the PUC's rules are pretty clear that this is firm energy. And in fact, during certain hours, you can bid no higher than $0 for those resources. If you haven't secured transmission to get it to the border at that point in time, you face a really significant risk. But the PUC has allowed those entities to decide how they're going to source those types of transactions. So there is a lot more parallel about these than perhaps meets the eye. I do think that longer term, we really need to think about how to satisfy this better, and I'm fully supportive of the ISO in their maximum import capability of taking a deeper look at this. At this point in time for this summer, I think we have arrived at a reasonable conclusion to ensure that California can continue to operate in a reliable manner while continuing to allow access to transmission. And that is, for this summer, I think the best that we can hope for. Moving forward, I do support the notion that we need to look at it again and make sure that those systems really do work together, but I do hope that you will approve the proposal that's in front of you today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Eric, for those comments. Operator, anybody else in the queue?
Yeah, we have one more in the queue at this time. Caller, please go ahead. Your line is unmuted.
Hi, this is Laura Trelease with the Bonneville Power Administration, and I'm not going to repeat our comments. I do appreciate the conversation about two very different paradigms, which I wholeheartedly agree with. We continue to advocate for equal priority for equal requirements as an interim solution and continue to stress the importance of the long-term solution. Appreciate the CAISO's commitment to get that going pretty quickly here. I wanted to just add one point of clarification to some of the comments that DMM has made and MSC as far as what is being done on other transmission service provider systems with their own native load. And there's a couple of key points I wanted to bring up. That firm transmission for native load service is not guaranteed. There are strict requirements for those native load customers to designate network resources and attest to those contracts. And then there's the element of what time that resource is designated. If they designate a network resource and there's no firm transmission available, they are offered a system impact study, and it goes into the planning process of that transmission service provider, and they have to use non-firm transmission until firm transmission is available. And I understand this is a bit apples and oranges because there's no long-term process right now for customers to request transmission to wheel through, nor is there a process for resources to be designated and secure that firm transmission for imports to serve CAISO load. But I just wanted to note that native load is not guaranteed firm transmission for the potential for them to designate network resources. And additionally, I wanted to bring up the point that there is no power supply contract or upstream transmission requirements for point-to-point service that does wheel through a transmission service provider system. So that it's almost in reverse what CAISO is requiring, which is that point-to-point doesn't require point-to-point is being required to show upstream firm transmission in a firm contract and designated network resources similar to RAR not. So that's very different than an adjacent TSP.
Did you have more, Laura? You there?
Yes. No, that's all I had.
Okay. Thank you so much for your comments. Roy, anybody else in the queue?
We have one caller in the queue. Please go ahead. Your line is unmuted.
Hi, yes, good afternoon. It's Mark Holman with PowerX. Thank you for the opportunity to speak this afternoon. Appreciate that this is a very difficult and obviously contentious issue and that really warrants a longer-term stakeholder process, and pleased to hear Greg Cook mention that the CAISO is planning on engaging such process. I think that the issues that are talked about today really highlight the fact that the CAISO does not have a framework for allocating physical transmission service on a forward basis. I think having said that, I want to reiterate the concerns that were raised by Bobby Olson at SRP that the way in which this proposal is structured, it will enable contracts to serve load in the CAISO BA where the California LSE has not contracted for identified supply, has not secured transmission service to the border, to displace contracts that have done so. Specifically, contracts where LSEs in the Desert Southwest have contracted with Northwest suppliers for identified resources with transmission service secured to the border, and those contracts will be displaced by agreements where there is no identified forward supply, no transmission service identified to the border, and for that reason, we see this proposal as contrary to open access, and it undermines the open access framework external to the CAISO for delivery to the border. We look forward to the longer-term stakeholder process, but do not support this proposal for that reason. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark, for your comments. Okay, well, any other comments?
No further comments in the queue at this time.
Okay, thanks for all those comments. So I guess at this point we move into a discussion amongst the governing body, and I'd like to kick that discussion off with some observations and a recommendation based on what I've heard, and it's based on what I've heard today in addition to all the meetings and all the comments have been filed on this particular issue. And I want to start out with a reminder that our decisional classification for this initiative is advisory. And further, our focus, as explained in our charter, is to promote, protect, and expand the success of the EIM for the benefit of its participants as a whole. And that really frames any action that we might take on this issue. And as we've looked at this issue, it's clear to me that the entire issue is certainly bigger than our purview, but we do play a role in it. And after watching the stakeholders grapple with this issue and observing how hard the staff has worked to find an equitable and palatable solution, I'm really concerned that any proposed short-term solution will have unintended consequences and contentious litigation from aggrieved parties. I'm also concerned that the divisiveness caused by this issue may negatively impact the positive regional cooperation that the Western Energy Imbalance Market has produced. Therefore, I have a suggestion for the governing body to consider for the use of our advisory opinion to the Board of Governors. So here's what I've been thinking about. Rather than us giving the Board of Governors specific advice on this proposal, I suggest that we take a broad view and consider advising the Board of Governors to seek a regional solution through a broad regional stakeholder process and utilize the FERC to that end. I believe this issue will end up at the FERC, and I suggest proactive action be taken to quickly get to a long-term solution to avoid protracted litigation, to protect the EIM from unintended consequences, and lessen the risk of losing momentum on regional cooperation. I also believe this advice is within our purview as stated in the governing body charter. So, and I'm also very pleased to hear Greg Cook talk about how they will very soon initiate this process to look at a longer-term solution. So with that, I would like to go to each governing body member for your thoughts on going this direction or any comments that you have on this issue. Let's start with Rob, and then I'll go to Val, and then Anita, and then Carl. Rob?
John, thank you. So let me first respond to your general proposal, and then maybe you can come back to me afterwards if we need to have a more robust discussion on items. So one is I fully agree And I kind of went through some prepared remarks here to go through that time is of the essence here. Is, the parties are probably exhausted on this issue to some degree. And more time is not going to bring this closer to resolution between the two perspectives. What needs to be said has been said, and I don't probably need to go back through all that, although I do have some particular perspectives. But making certain, since we do not have FERC counsel, we do not have any FERC analysts here, we're not in a position to go through and come up with an individual expert opinion, although I am prepared to share my individual perspective on how this all lays out. So going through your thoughts on can we move forward and get to a place where we can have this expeditiously resolved, because as I see it, it's pretty clear that, when you look at the comments, that not one entity within California thought this had gone far enough, and not one entity outside of California had thought it didn't go too far. And so I found the comments from the independent parties pretty interesting. And, California notes that they need to have an allocation of transmission to meet native load. And I don't think there's disagreement on that. I think the question is how you do that. And then, those outside of California have noted that there needs to be fair, equitable, non-discriminatory transmission access. And, the question is how you weigh those two in making this change. And we're here with short time frames. Nobody asked for this to happen. It was just a result of what happened last summer during the heat wave. I think Greg Cook had noted adequately and clearly that this has been out there for a long time, but now it's upon us. So, John, in general, I am supportive of trying to get through this, and again, conflict of FERC rules, but more that which elements are there that are weighing out. And I think that's an important thing. And I think the other part that makes it particularly thorny is, and I don't know if this occurs anywhere else in the country where you have, those with, I'll say, traditional transmission service outside of California using that traditional term-based, non-firm approach, then moving into a market-based transmission service, which is very different, and that is particularly applying to these wheel-throughs. And we're talking about a compressed time frame. And then the last part of that is certainly the retroactive mode, where you're starting those entities outside of California at one point, and then you're moving them to another point in this environment for this summer. And so, one, John, I would support moving towards getting a focus on the FERC resolution, because I do have concerns on the outcome.
Okay, thank you, Rob. Val?
Thank you. I think John and Rob both made some very good points. So I'd like to say this. I agree that last summer's heat wave daylighted a number of problems with CAISO market rules and procedures as they exist today. And it's pretty clear that the proposal in front of us leaves just about everyone with a financial stake in the market with a different level of discomfort, so much so that folks either suggest fixes or suggest that we abandon the proposal altogether, and frankly, no one seems to be particularly thrilled with the proposal, although I will acknowledge 680's comments. The consequences of this proposal on the different stakeholders is pretty apparent. And John, you noted we are advisory on this matter. But we also know, because we've heard it, that the impacts of the proposed changes are reverberating throughout the EIM footprint. CAISO has indicated that it will fairly quickly begin a separate stakeholder process to look at how entities can obtain transmission over the CAISO system on a forward or firm basis. And the need for that longer-term effort to fix that issue is quite clear. I support the effort to achieve a more durable solution. I kind of worry that where we are today with regard to this summer, we might be exactly in the same place a year from now with regard to next summer. So I do worry about that. But in the meantime, we're left with this coming summer. And so what's not real clear to me, John, is when you say, we need input potentially from FERC, are you suggesting delaying this particular proposal, or are you suggesting that we move that the option exists that we just move this forward to the Board of Governors and ask them to act expeditiously on this?
Yeah, I'll respond to that, and it kind of goes to what Rob said. We don't have FERC counsel, so I don't know how to engage at FERC. And so what I was suggesting is that the Board of Governors will decide the best way to get this in front of FERC, not to make any opinions on the proposal to them.
Okay. Thank you for the clarification. I think I'm done with my remarks.
Okay, Nita?
Thanks, John. So I want to acknowledge the work that's been done by all of the regional participants, the regional partners, and the staff on some of the things that were more easily put in place, because there have been a number of changes that have been put in place to try and, they were just small incremental changes, but a number of incremental things that have been done along the way that did not have the controversy that we're seeing in this proposal. So in terms of fixing the RS and improving the communications and looking at the reliability demand response, the management of storage, those things went into place without the kind of controversy that we're having on this last issue of import, export, and rail routes. In the short term, there absolutely is no agreement. I've talked to a number of stakeholders. We've done a fair amount of outreach. I've been on almost all of the calls in regard to this issue, and it has not coalesced throughout the beginning to where we are today. And so despite the overwhelming need to sustain reliability and require changes to resource adequacy for the California LSCs, the California agencies have not addressed the shortages within California. And it's further burdening the participants who rely on the transmission system, both within and without California. And they're going to be impacted by whatever proposal gets approved. So I think there will be unintended consequences, and that concerns me deeply, Val, along with you. I'm worried about what is it we don't see, just given things that we didn't see last year. In the longer term, I believe that all of the commenters, by and large, definitely do support that there needs to be changes. I think there's a body of folks that say, we need to do something different. There's the interest in a Western market, and if we can't solve these kinds of things, having a Western market becomes a dim light. So I am really encouraged by Greg's comments about how quickly they're going to move this initiative along and get it up and running. And I hope that all of the parties will stay at this table to help resolve where this really does need to go as we go forward and try and hold that Western market together. I do think that all the parties, California included, they need to recognize the importance of working with our neighbors here. And we're all in this together, and we're going to all be in it together whether we like it or not. So how do we do that in a way that part of the group doesn't feel disenfranchised from the other part, and we can pull this polarization together? In light of the urgency of this summer, so as I referred to earlier, it said that this issue was just not a big issue in last summer, and yet it's turned into a significant issue. There is urgency to try and resolve this. I'm hoping that we will advise the Board of Governors to not necessarily approve it, but to have it moved to FERC for FERC to kind of give us some more guidance. Because I think approving this is, for me personally, it's not ready for approval. It feels like a little bit of a failure that as a Western region, we couldn't get closer together on this issue. So, John, that's my thoughts.
Okay, thank you, Anita. Carl?
Thanks, John. So I think that part of what you said, John, that I just want to reiterate, I think is important, is that it's apparent that whatever happens, there's going to be, potential litigation that happens, a potential protracted process, potential, just a messy process. And I think that your suggestion of whatever the mechanism is of getting these contested points about open access, what does open access require? What does a fair application of the concepts of open access across these different paradigms look like in this unique and hopefully temporary situation is necessary, because we can assert it up front and people are going to follow through with contestation after the fact. So let's just say we would like FERC to hear these arguments in whatever way they most expeditiously can be taken to FERC, and we convey this to the Board of Governors with that thought. Let this play out. Let the decisions about how to fairly apply open access across these paradigms for this temporary situation be applied, so that we minimize the lingering damaging effects to finances and relationships. That's all, John.
Okay, thanks, everybody. Well, actually, based on what I've heard from you all, I've scratched out a motion. And I know normally Roger would read the motion, but I'm going to go ahead and read what I've scratched out. And then I guess, Roger, if you would take it from there to actually do the vote and seek a second if it goes that far.
John, I would be happy to do that. I mean, I will take only minor exception to being outsourced, but that's just humor. For everyone that knows me, that's just a little humor. But no, I think that's great. Why don't you go ahead and read the motion? We'll mark you down as moving party, and then we'll get a second, and I'll take the vote.
Okay. So with that, I move to advise the Board of Governors to take the necessary steps to start a regional stakeholder process and engage the FERC as necessary to proactively create a durable long-term regional solution to this issue. And further, I suggest that we provide this advice verbally to the Board of Governors along with a verbal explanation of our advice.
John, Roger, do I have to wait to ask a question, or can I ask a question?
No, you wait.
I'm sorry. I committed the ultimate sin. I was on mute talking away. No, please go ahead and ask your question.
So So, John, the way you just read that, so I just want to be clear, this looks like we're advising the Board of Governors to do something in the future, but nothing with this particular proposal. Did I hear that wrong?
Right. I didn't reference the proposal. I'll read it again. Would that be helpful? If you don't have it.
Yeah,
well, so here's my question.
Can CAISO type it up? Can you put it live onto the screen so we can all see it?
Sure. Let me.
Whoever has control of the slide, they just add a new slide and type it in.
Yeah, I can't add a new slide. I can pull up a blank Word document if that will suffice.
Yep.
That'll work.
Okay. Hold on one second. Let me share. And make sure you can see the blank document.
And Stacey,
can you see it?
I had it kind of drafted up, so I sent it to you in Word. So if you want to look at that.
Yes, we can. Yes, we can see it.
So, John, I'm going to go back to my question for a minute. Okay, the actual request before us is that the proposal that is going to the board, and it seems to me that your motion might include rather than approving or adopting this proposal, our suggestion is, and then what you said.
Yeah, that would be fine. Am I unmuted here? Yeah, that would be fine. You know, it's an advisory vote, so it's really up to us what we advise the Board of Governors. And I think your clarification is helpful. It does certainly say that we're not saying thumbs up or thumbs down on the proposal for this. I would amend that motion to add that in there if you wanted. Carl?
Yeah. So first of all, hopefully there's a process for getting from your words to the blank page. Second of all, you said long-term solution, and I'm wondering if that's really what you meant. If you really meant status quo pending a long-term solution, or if you meant any short and long-term solutions necessary.
Yeah, I didn't reference the status quo because that's an action on the proposal. So yeah, we could say any short-term and long-term. You know, I had durable. I sent this to Stacey, so maybe she can paste it in here and you can see what I said. And
okay. I think that there's the distinction between the long-term process that we all affirm and are comforted that Greg is initiating in end of May, beginning of June. And that's, I think, towards the durable solution. Then I think there's the matter of this summer, which is a short-term matter. So I think if I would feel more comfortable saying short and long-term as opposed to just saying durable and not being clear about that.
Okay.
But that's my preference.
I have no problem with that. We could, add in what Anita suggested is the header, put in short-term, and then take a look at it, see what you think. Stacey, did you get that?
The only thing to short-term, we have a specific ask, which is the summer readiness, which is, we ought to call it out. It's summer. Right now, it's not a short-term. We can call that the short-term proposal, but.
Christine,
did you freeze?
Can you increase the font? Oh, you are. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you, Val.
I needed that as well.
Well, I would move. So, can I play with this, John?
Sure.
So, I would move to advise the board because that's what we're doing, advising. I would move the board to advise the Board of Governors to seek to seek an expedited hearing on the import-export wheel-through for summer of 2021 and take the necessary steps for the longer term.
If you do that, I think you're telling them to pass it, to approve it. That's what you're telling them to do.
Well, I'd say expedited hearing versus approving, versus taking action on.
Well, what's the hearing about?
Okay. I didn't know if they could, so this is a question probably for Roger. I didn't know if they could tee up the issue and take it to FERC for some guidance versus approve something that is going to have a fair amount of, will cause a fair amount of contention.
Well, yeah, as a practical matter, I mean, there were various potential procedures to get it in front of FERC. None of them really would meet the time frames that we are dealing with, nor are really feasible for this type of issue. So where we're at is at a FPA 205 filing, which would mean we would file our policy request with tariff revisions, and ultimately that would, we could ask for, and Anna could answer. She may have better insight into this than I, but we could ask for expedited hearing on it. I'm not sure if that's the intention or not off the top of my head, but regardless, and that would tee it up, and that will also, invite comments and protests and ultimately some litigation on it. Anna, do you have more to add on that?
Yeah, this is Anna. Hi, everybody. This is Anna McKenna. I just wanted to offer a little more to what Roger just outlined. It is our intent to request that the Commission act within 60 days, which can be viewed as an expedited process. That is the normal time in which they act. We are hoping to give them 60 days to decide on this. Given the level of controversy, perhaps 60 days will seem rushed, but it is an expedited process from our perspective, because we do want an order in time for this summer. So it is not shorter than 60 days, at least, as currently contemplated, to provide the Commission enough time to consider these questions carefully.
And I was going to go that what I heard both Mark and Greg say, and since they're still here, they can correct me, is that they're committed towards this process and that they really have already initiated it. And so I guess the question is, are we going to address the proposal that's going to the board on Wednesday? And if we're going to be silent on the proposal, we should at least say why we're silent on it, or if we have some outside concerns as to why we don't fully endorse it or something. And that's the reason I had the verbal state with an explanation. Okay, so that's, John, is what your plan is to incorporate in your verbal comments. I'll say the overall perspective of the governing body on the concerns. Yes, that was my plan. The discussion we've had. And that's why when I crafted this, I know what you're saying, Anita, but that's why I put down there and engage the FERC as necessary. And if you want to put something in there to be clear, what was your original comment, Anita, that we're not doing an action on the proposal, that's fine. You went a different direction with your comment there.
I think, John, if we're silent to it, and we can take the summer readiness out. Being silent to it is saying that we have no opinion on this particular proposal.
Yeah, that was your original comment, so I think that's probably a good one for clarification. and you could come up with the words. You said them earlier, something like we aren't going to advise on the specific proposal. However,
I said for me personally, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I would agree with that friendly amendment.
So where would you stick it in? I move to not advise.
Okay, hold on. Okay.
Board of Governors on this specific proposal. And then something to the effect of, however, advise the Board of Governors to. They advise before that Board of Governors.
Or however the governing body.
Say it again. I'm sorry, Anita. I didn't hear that.
You can just say however to advise. Or it'd be however advises. So try advises. That advises the governing body.
No, it's not the Board of Governors.
Oh, excuse me, the Board of Governors. Yeah. Right.
I think it's advised.
I think it's advised as well. Sorry for the word switching, but
no.
Well, better get it right because we're going to vote on it. So.
All right, so take a look at it, see what you think, and then we could add Carl's if everybody's comfortable putting short-term and along with long-term. If that's still important to you, Carl.
Let me read it through.
Okay.
Has the editing stopped, or are we still?
For the moment.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Why don't we just take a moment? I'll read it and see if I still feel like short-term and long-term is better than durable.
Hey, John, this is Stace. You might consider changing the I to the EIM governing body advises.
Yeah, Stacey, I was going to go ahead and I have a few thoughts on it, but I was going to let them get the substance out, and then I think we can do a little bit of cleanup.
Then you need to say probably after the however, the EIM governing body advises the Board of Governors.
Yeah, and move should be moved.
Okay. At the moment, when it's time for something additional, let me know and I'll speak.
I think you should go ahead, Carl, and then we can play with the deck chairs when we're done.
Okay. I would. Yeah. So. I'm sorry, Anita. Did you have something?
So you're going to be more profound than me, Carl. I was just going to say where it says this was a specific proposal, the actual proposal that we have before us is the export load and wheeling priorities for summer 2021 readiness. So that's specific to what we're not advising them
on. And can I then, I will jump in, and I think maybe the way to say that is that the EIM governing body does not opine on the substance of management's proposal relating to load, exports, and wheeling priorities, and then go on from there.
Can you say that again, Roger?
Yeah, does not opine on the substance of management's proposal relating to load, exports, and wheeling priorities. ever.
I'll clean it up in a second, okay?
Yeah.
Do I have this right then? Because I've seen it shown different ways. So export loading wheeling priorities, right?
Right.
Summer 20,
and we're going to do for summer 2021, we're set forth in the summer 2021 readiness proposal.
Okay, let's look.
Okay, we'll clean it up. And then the next sentence would continue. However, the EIM governing body advises the Board of Governors, and then this would be where we get profound thoughts.
All right. So I would say proactively create near-term and durable long-term regional solution, to create a near-term and durable long-term regional solution to this issue.
So what is near-term beyond, what is this summer?
Near-term.
So I have the same question as Val, because the proposal is this summer, and then long-term is going to be in place as for the schedule for next summer.
Right.
So you have this proposal, which is for this summer, and then they'll have the initiative in place for next summer.
So I thought that we were asking FERC to engage on the different interpretations.
No.
Of. Okay, go ahead, John.
What I was thinking there is that if we, it's kind of Anita's comment, if we're asking FERC to come back and tell us if this proposal works, the way that works is you have to file a proposal, which means you support it. And that's what I was trying to avoid here. And make the focus on the long-term durable solution that we heard stakeholders reiterate time and time today. And then, what happens in the near term is going to be up to the Board of Governors to figure out.
Okay, so we're not commenting on this summer at all through this language. Okay, well, so just take out what I edited in then. So create a durable long-term solution is the spirit of what's intended here.
Yeah.
Okay.
I actually
No, I don't think.
I think that was his comment.
Yeah, I think that was just commentary, color commentary. I don't think the spirit was part of the motion.
No.
Okay.
Literal.
Are we good, or just any other?
John, before we move on, again, Roger was addressing, part of that FERC process, and since this near-term, this summer process takes place, and Anna also, mentioned that looking for expedited process, and maybe Anna can come back on. If the Board of Governors approves the proposal, it will be submitted, and I forget the exact date that it will go back to FERC. That will allow the parties to intervene and/or protest, and there should be some time frame for that to be resolved before any implementation or changes can take place. I think it would be good if someone could confirm that is going to be the process or the likely process or something similar to that.
Yes, this is Anna. I can confirm that. Subject to the board's approval of this proposal in a couple days, we would file on or about April 28th, and we would ask for a 60-day turnaround on the item. which is a minimum we can ask the Commission for without waiver of notice requirements. And that's the process through which parties would have the opportunity to comment at FERC and would provide us time also to respond to those comments. And then FERC would take action. And then FERC may choose to take, further action for additional hearing on the matter, but that is the process we would start with our filing on April 28th.
Anna, this is Rob again. So just on that time frame, if FERC decides to do any type of I would say action, let's say a technical workshop or anything like that with parties who file, would that occur within the 60-day window then?
Yes, we would hope so that we could get indication of their final decision within those 60 days.
Okay, thank you. So, in effect, then the parties who have submitted comments to date and provided comments to the governing bodies will need to provide those comments or similar once, assuming the Board of Governors approves the proposal for submittal, intervene or file comments at FERC, and then it will be resolved on those particular issues with FERC under that process.
I'll second the motion as it's written. This is Val.
Oh, I was going to offer another friendly amendment.
Go ahead. This is the time.
Okay. So this is an issue that's important to all of our stakeholders, both internal and external to California. This is a broad interest, and we've all had lots of conversation. And this might be inappropriate. Roger, you can advise us. John, you can say not going there. But it seems like we ought to start with, given the polarization of stakeholders, the EIM governing body does not opine.
I don't have a problem with that. That was going to be my verbal comments.
Yeah, I think you should save that for the verbal. I think the motion should, anyway.
I was going to, read the motion if it's approved and say it was approved, and here's the background.
The only thing is this is our record of what we're doing. And
I'm okay.
That's okay.
Yeah, so I guess this is sort of a question for Roger. This first sentence here, I think that's where Anita's looking, and technically I think it would be an alternate motion, but never mind. So this first sentence here, for the clarity of the record, should we give a reason?
Well, I think that, there will be minutes, and I'll let Stacy speak to how much detail will go in the minutes. You can give more reason if you want in the motion. Typically, this is a kind of a unique situation, I suppose. And most types of approved motions where we've had a memo and, for the reasons stated in the memo, et cetera. So there's no should on it. There's no must. I think, you can decide as the governing body either way if you want to put a reason in here. I think that you give yourself maybe a little bit more flexibility if you leave it as it is. But again, that's just my thought.
So I have a comment on I prefer that it be left as is rather than having that for the flexibility reason described. I also just say I really don't like the use of the word polarization because that's a vague term that is very broad and cross-cutting, and I don't think that's what's happening here. I think what's happening here is there are differences of opinion about the interpretation of what open access allows and requires across these different paradigms. And I don't want to convey polarization. To me indicates a broader rift than what we're hearing. We're hearing we all want to work this out. We understand it's a complicated issue, but this violates open access for this reason, in my opinion, and we have different opinions on that. So I don't feel like it's necessary to say that in the motion. I just really wouldn't want us to convey a sense of pervasive polarization when rather what we have is something that's more closely aligned with the particular challenge that we have this summer with these different paradigms.
I agree with Carl. I think I could craft those statements for verbal without the use of the word polarization. You know, we've all heard what's happened. So, you know, again, I make the motion that's in front of us and wait for a second.
Well, I was willing to just second it, but actually, in looking at that last sentence, where we say further EIM governing body suggests, I think we should just say we move that we provide this advice verbally. You okay with that, John?
Oh, yeah, it's all part of the motion.
Yeah. I mean, it's part of the motion, right?
That's a Roger.
Yeah, it is. It's,
Can you remove the second verbal down below?
I think we're moving that. Yeah, we'll just change it more affirmatively so that takes out any doubt. So further, the EIM governing body moves that we provide this advice verbally.
Well, we don't have to say that.
I think you say verbal.
The body will provide this advice verbally. It doesn't even have to say motion.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes when we have multiple paragraphs, we'll say the EIM governing body, it's moved that the EIM governing body acts further. The EIM governing body, you can provide the verb there, but I think we oftentimes do use moves, but I'm not sure that it's going to matter either way.
Yeah, so John, this is your motion?
The motion is before you, and I make that motion.
I'll second it.
Okay, and so let's go ahead with a vote. John, your vote?
Before we do that, we normally would have a little discussion after the second, but is that right? What you're doing? Yeah.
Oh, you can do that.
Typical. Rob?
Yeah, John, I would like to clarify that under the last part. First of all, I like the way it's been modified. I agree that the first part should just be straightforward. And all I want to do is clarify under the last part, under the with a verbal explanation of our advice, that when you're with the Board of Governors, you will explain why we're not providing a formal opinion to them on the proposal.
Right. It would consist of the fact that, we've got two paradigms coming together, and the focus really needs to be on a durable long-term solution. I mean, that's going to be...
I think, John, you're explaining what you're going to say, but, Rob, I think it's fine the way it is. I don't know if we have to be so specific.
Val, what I want to do is just make sure I understood what the motion is, so that, before I vote, I understand what it is that we are approving.
Okay, so you're not suggesting a language change here?
I was not.
Okay, sorry.
Okay, so where are we at? Any more discussion? Or Rob, did we glaze over your question? You kind of know.
You answered my question, yeah.
Okay,
yes, John, you answered it.
Okay, perfect. Any other discussion on it, I guess? Back to you, Roger.
Okay, thank you. Well, let me note for the record, too, that we will read through this and clean it up and make sure if there's any typos or, missed an and or an or a the, we'll fix all of that. But I think we have the substance down. And with the motion before you, we have John moved. I believe, did Val second the motion? Was that correct, just for the record?
That's correct.
Thank you. Okay, and so let me go ahead and I'll take the votes in the order of I see people on my screen. Anita, your vote, please.
Roger, I'm still thinking.
Okay. Would you like me to move on and take other votes while you think?
Please.
Carl, your vote, please.
Aye.
John, your vote.
Aye.
Robert, your vote.
Yes.
Val, your vote.
Yes.
Anita, I will come back to you.
I really, really struggled with this one. I know we're done with the discussion. I get it with voting. I'm going to vote no.
Thank you. Okay. We have a 4-to-1 vote on this, and the motion does pass.
Okay. Thank you, Roger, and thanks for all the work. And I know this was kind of like making sausage, but, I'm kind of glad we did this in general session so it's transparent and everybody could see the deliberations and what we had to do. So I'm appreciative of all the time spent on this. So with that, I think we're down to the last agenda item, which is any future agenda items.
Hey, John, before we move on, I just have a question since we have a 4-to-1 vote. And that is, Anita, are you going to provide an explanation for the no vote?
I wasn't planning to. I think for me, there was such a gap between for me personally, there's such a gap between where we are, what we're going to. It's not clear that it actually solves all the problems, and there will not be the same kind of controversy that we just had. So I don't feel like we got to a resolution that for me personally is not our vote's fine, but the process. I don't feel like the process got to where it needed to be, and so I can't support it. Not our vote. Vote's fine.
Yeah. It would be recorded as such. Sorry, John. No, I just say it would be recorded as, there was one no vote from Anita.
Yeah.
So, Anita, can I just acknowledge Anita's level of discomfort? And this is my fear. I don't want to be here again next year, a year from now, going through some of this same agony. I'm hoping, that we aren't in this position again next year.
I totally agree with that. But.
So Chair Prescott, this is Elliot Mainzer. So obviously I've been listening with rapt attention the whole conversation. I guess the only thing I can do, first of all, I appreciate your deliberations. I appreciate all the input of everybody else today. And I want to just, as I did a few weeks ago with respect to the sufficiency test, just provide on behalf of all of us here at the ISO just unequivocal commitment to getting this issue moved into a better place. I think we've heard we have a lot of intellectual capital in this region, both within the state and in adjacent utilities across the region to leverage. We have a lot of expertise to dig in, and we're absolutely committed to getting to a durable solution. We all need it for clarity, and quite frankly, and I appreciate some of the other sentiments, and I think this is a test, quite frankly, of our capacity to work together across a broader footprint to meet our shared reliability responsibilities in an equitable and fair manner. So we're absolutely committed to that, and so we appreciate all the input today. We'll be taking it to heart as we circle back and get ready for the next round of work on this important topic. So thank you all for really digging in there and working with us.
Thank you, Elliot. Okay, any final closing?
John, I was just going to ask, do you need any input for your approval comments? You had everything you need from the governing body.
Well, yeah, they're just going to be verbal, so yeah, you can send me. I guess that's okay, Roger. They can send me their thoughts. Okay.
Yeah.
And then from that, whatever you send me, then I can craft my verbal report.
Yeah. Thank
I
you.
use it everybody, so you'll see what's going to be said. Okay. All right. With that, down to the final thing, the future agenda items. Anything? Okay. Wow. Okay. Thanks, everybody. We are adjourned.
Well, let me thank everyone as well. Really good job on some difficult issues and crafting on the fly, too. That's new for us, and we appreciate everyone's patience and just the willingness to work together.
Okay. And thanks to Roy and Stacey B.
Absolutely.
All right.
They have earned happy hour. Have a great evening, everyone.
All right. Thanks.
All right. Thanks, guys. Thank you.
Good night.
That concludes our conference. Thanks for using Event Services. You may now disconnect.